Today we're going through the last part of chapter 1, which talks about work and play in hunting and foraging societies, essentially our ancestors, and how a few of the philosophical concepts relate to us right now. So a few things that you'll know after this session and after reading that last part of the chapter. You'll know what exotelic activity is, what enjoyable exotelic activity is, autotelic activity, and then really what do these three things mean. You'll be able to give an example and then also connect to today in our jobs as professionals. And then we'll also look at a few different definitions of play when it comes to the philosophical sense. And so we start out with what work is, and really to our ancestors, hunting and foraging, that's what they did to survive for food. That was their work. And so it's interesting, the phrase when people say we're going to earn a living, it literally is living for them, or it was for them. And so that process was something that was essential. It was a need, it was a duty they had to do, and not just out of a sense of obligation to a community, but really out of necessity for survival. And there may have been some side benefit to the process of hunting and foraging for some of these individuals. Maybe they enjoyed the thrill of the challenge, but really the main reason why they were doing it was that necessity. And so we see the definition of work is right here. It's a behavior that's driven by needs, it's compelled, and it's not a freely chosen behavior in itself. And a few things we know about work. How we determine its success is by if that need is actually met. And often work acknowledges there's some sort of deficiency. So if you think of several of the jobs that exist, even in our career, so a personal trainer, for example, a deficiency in society that we may have or is people's understanding or knowledge of how to move, how to exercise safely, how to be motivated to exercise. Is another reason why we have personal trainers, so that it illuminates that deficiency as well by just having that position and the work they do. A really important thing to know about how work is defined, it is something that's product focused. And so the means just gets done, even if it's not ideal, not fun, not something that we want to do. It's justifiable because of what happens in the outcome. So meeting that need or meeting that deficiency. And so this is really what's known as exotelic activity. It's a behavior or it's work that's done where the process of doing is really not as important as the product. And so it's the idea of the end is outside of the process and the end is the focus. So our work is exotelic, typically out of obligation, sometimes begrudgingly. And so after work is done, this idea of meeting a need or meeting a deficiency, we hope that the consequence is positive. So, for example, of our ancestors, it's living another day, not going hungry. In our more modern society, or what we have now in more civilized society, is the positive consequence of work is a paycheck. And so again, we may not like what we do, but we do it because that outcome at the end is what provides for us. And there's usually not a ton of redeeming factors that we focus on other than that end outcome or the product. And so we know, though, that this outcome or this product, whether it's the paycheck, the next meal, the fact that we still do the work, even though it's not our ideal or it's out of duty, it's still a rational process to do work, because this behavior that's driven by a need is still there, and that's a fundamental thing in our human psyche. And so that's why this desire to work or to provide is still in us, still to some extent in our DNA. So what if we actually like our work? Even if we like it some of the time, but not all the time. And so this leads me to think of this quote, if you love your job or love your career, you'll never actually work a day in your life. Well, you're still actually working, because it's still an exotelic type of process. You're still focusing on the end. You're still trying to meet the need or the deficiency, but you happen to find enjoyment or fun or some sort of internal motivation within the process. And this is something that isn't necessarily guaranteed. It's different amongst different people, so it's really a serendipitous type of event if there is enjoyment that happens in it. And so oftentimes enjoyable exotelic starts out as just exotelic, but then enjoyment factor is added into it. Why we care about this? So think of foragers or hunters that did that because they absolutely had to, but then again, they enjoyed the personal challenge, or they enjoyed the process of, a great find or of a challenging kill or something like that. And it's what a lot of us probably aim for in our job is, even though we know we have to do the work, we know there's parts of it we're not going to like, we also are going to be aiming to feel fulfilled in it. And so we also want to think about it this way, and this will come back later at the end of this talk. What we have our clients do in an athlete setting, PE teaching setting, personal training, recreation, fitness, whatever you have, physical activities work. And so for a lot of our clients, it is not a fun thing for them to sweat and to exert themselves physically, but they know the end justifies the means. So if it's being healthier, or if it's losing weight, or if it's helping to reverse some of the impact of pre-chronic disease indicators they have that very large external motivation to fulfill a deficiency in their health, and so that's why they're there. Or they know as an athlete that their playing time might be attached to how they perform in practice or in strength and conditioning, or they know, if they have to perform on the athletic floor, that a training session is going to make them faster and stronger and better to do that sport, and so that end is justifiable for them. Now we look at play. So the book takes the concept of play from pretty philosophical aspects. So we're going to think a little bit back to basics. Think back to the last time you actually saw somebody play. And so maybe it was on the internet, on Instagram. There's a lot of good examples, but I like to suggest kids or pets are pretty good examples when we see actual play, free play. And so I mean this differently than if you just watched a basketball game or a tennis match or something like that. The last time you saw just play for the pure joy of exploring space or objects and using free time. And think of even when was the last time you did that? So not necessarily, playing an organized game or something with a lot of structure, but just something where you took that time and you used it without a sense of duty or obligation. So play often is considered autotelic. And so in an autotelic type of situation, the satisfaction lies completely in the process of doing and experiencing something, not within the outcome at all. So that's where we see some instances with games or with play like sport, for example, if the satisfaction of the experience is in a win, that's not necessarily autotelic. It's more in just the opportunity to be out there, the chance to compete, taking in all the sights and the sounds of the competition, for example. Those are the autotelic elements of play. And so here's a few ways it could be defined. So Huizinga says it's free activity. It's a good definition. It's not serious. And then this is the interesting part. There's no material interest, or it's not paid, essentially. And so that's where we see like professional athletics, for example. Athletes they're playing a game. They're playing the same exact game. If an NBA player, WNBA player, if she is playing for her salary in a regularly scheduled league game, it's literally the same game that we would go play if we went out on a basketball court at the rec and played basketball. But the fact that she's getting paid to do that makes it her job, her occupation, her work. And so there is an end to it. There is an outcome or objective. It's to win. That paycheck ultimately is one of the end results of it. So even if she loves playing the game, it's not necessarily, according to this definition, autotelic version of play. And this version does put in some fixed rules in the concept of having a social and orderly manner. Another definition says that there's no sense of utility. So it's just to do it. It's not to meet some sort of cause or a need or deficiency or for some purpose. The other part of Suit's definition is kind of interesting. He talked about when we think of light, we don't really know what it is until we're in the dark, and vice versa. And so he said it's the same with play and work. We really don't know what, so think of free time. Essentially what it feels like until we see it in opposition to what working is. Another definition focuses on the happiness as contrasted by what responsibility or duty feels like. And then Schmidt's definition talks about it's a suspension of the ordinary. And so the ordinary is referred to as just our normal day in life, and it's guided by free choice, joy, and fascination. And then our final one by Schiller, a little bit out there, but talks about it as an aesthetic harmony. And so how we feel, what we might look like, it's beautiful, and it's a balance that contrast a distorted life. And so the work or sense of duty is considered distorted or influenced by that outcome as opposed to that freeness that happens in play. And so I like to think of it with these particular definitions of play. A lot of it relates to the concept of free time. And it's not just free time like when we think of mindfulness, or if we take a nap, or if we're meditating, we're not actually doing anything. But to some extent, it's that concept of pause. So we're stopping this process of work, and we're holding off and meeting some sort of duty. We're not working anymore. But the big thing that play is different than maybe mindfulness or meditation or just chilling is that you are doing something. It's not dutiful. It's whatever you're doing. If you're pushing a toy car that a little girl is playing with, if it's a little boy drawing with chalk, if it's, kids playing with bubbles outside, if it's you playing around with your dog, it's literally just the delight and the meaning of just doing it and taking that pause, that free time, that break away from things where there's a sense of duty. So in our worlds of training and of coaching, a couple questions we need to think about of how these all relate. So why in the world would people want to do physical work? It's hard to do physical work, to train, to work out, to exercise, to be physically active, all of those things. It's not always easy. And the other thing we need to think about as trainers and coaches is people may have their own reasons for wanting to do it, but then we actually need to get them to come to us to do it. So if it's to come to a gym, to come to a personal training setting, to actually participate in physical education class. And so we want to use some of these concepts of how people are motivated to do work or to play. And we can use these concepts if we understand people's reason for coming or reason to want to do something from a motivational standpoint to help educate them, and honestly, even from a marketing strategy. And so here's a few ways to look at it. So the exotelic, first of all, way is when we think of physical activity as contributing to our work life, or if it's our duty to do it, or our survival. So work or duty, the good example I think of is someone in the military or armed forces or public service or some sort of job where there is a physical work requirement, maybe sometimes even assessed. And so they absolutely need to do that for their work. Even an athlete, not even professional athlete, but an athlete, if that's part of their expectation is to be able to perform on the field or on the court, they have to be putting that work in during practice or physical training sessions. And from a survival standpoint, it may not always be life or death, but an individual who is physically inactive and is showing some signs as maybe pre-diabetic or having some signs of depression or starting to have pain, or if they are becoming overweight or obese and physical activity is not a part of their lifestyle, eventually it is going to be a part of survival for them, for their health and well-being. So these are some of the examples that people may either give to us why they want to start exercising, why they keep doing it, or what we can also use to get them to do it. And so it's, everything you see here, just being able to play with their grandkids, like even though that sounds pretty touchy-feely, like that still is an outcome that somebody has. And a lot of times that's their motivation, and that's their sense of survival for their health. The second area is the enjoyable exotelic way. And so this is where people know, yeah, it's work, I don't like it, or it's really hard, or they'll, be talking negatively about the workout the whole time, but then when they're done, they're like, oh, that was really good, I'm glad I did it. And so this is the time from a marketing standpoint or motivational standpoint where we use kind of some wording to tell people it's going to be hard work, but you're going to have fun. You are going to feel good about yourself while you're here. You're going to find things that you're going to be able to do that you weren't able to do before. You're going to be able to listen to great music here in our gym if there's some sort of short-term challenge. Maybe it's the motivation of a prize to do it. That's what we see for the enjoyment aspect. And then for play, this is where it gets a little bit different. And so this is where people's reasons for coming is when they're not about the typical things. It's not about losing weight. It's not necessarily even about health from a physical standpoint or hitting any sort of metric. It's they just need time to just let things go, to feel free. Or if you think of a lot of outdoor activity, it's a little bit easier to think about. Let's say you're going hiking on a beautiful hike. It's just seeing what you can see. It's going and experiencing an adventure, or seeing what you can do, seeing what you're made of, as opposed to getting somewhere in particular. It's kind of like an open-ended outcome, and you're just there to see what happens along the way. That's how we can define play. So more will for sure come on some of these topics when we get into the motivational aspects of exercise and sports psychology. But it's important to know that a lot of these connections go way, way, way back to our ancient hunter and gatherer forager ancestors.